On related issues, Donald Trump has invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House next week to discuss the path to a lasting peace for Gaza, the West Bank and Israel. Good. I hope they escalate the current sickening hostage trades. I'd like to know, where is the Bibas family? Mum, Dad and the 2 little boys, more than 15 months in captivity. One set of grandparents slaughtered. Where are they now? If they're alive, why haven't Hamas freed them? If they're dead, why are their bodies not returned? What depraved minds anywhere in the world could justify cruelty like this, evil like this? How do we explain Hamas and the support it gets around the world? Let me introduce you to a man from Gaza. He grew up there. He's lost friends and relatives in the war. He shares aspirations for Palestinian statehood, but he calls out the Islamist terrorism of Hamas. Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib is a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council in Washington, and I asked him to explain the distinction between support for Palestinians and acceptance of Hamas.
Certainly. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience. And so there's very much so a desire by myself and many silenced Palestinians, moderate Palestinians, pragmatic and practical Palestinians, who are often overlooked, to separate our people's just and urgent aspirations for freedom, independence, from Hamas's Islamist agenda and terrorism that have hijacked the Palestinian National Project, that have failed the Palestinian people in Gaza and beyond, that sabotaged the Oslo peace process, that squandered our resources, gotten tens of thousands of our people killed for absolutely nothing. So I've been on a mission since October 7th to, not just because it's the effective and politically prudent thing to do, but because it's also the moral thing, the right thing to do, to denounce Hamas, to denounce October 7th, to say, not in my name, taking women and children as hostages and starting this entirely unnecessary, unprovoked war in the name of the Palestinian people. And there are many like me who are unfortunately not just afraid to speak out in Gaza or in the West Bank, but are being systematically pushed aside in the Western world by a lot of the liberal media and liberal news outlets, who have formed this prototype kind of perception of what being pro-Palestine actually looks like.
Yeah, so explain this to us. This is what's confounded me, because it's so obvious what's gone on here. Gaza was not occupied by Israel, has not been for almost 2 decades. Gaza was the opportunity for Palestinian aspirations to present themselves in a peaceful and hopefully prosperous way, but instead you had Hamas in control, initially elected, and on October the 7th they committed the most atrocious atrocities, the most bloodthirsty atrocities, deliberately sparking a war that they knew would lead to the death of tens of thousands of Palestinians. Explain to us why. What's the motivation there?
Well, Hamas hit a dead end in terms of its failed governance. The people of Gaza had rejected the group's failures time and again. They've grown weary in the lead up to October 7th of all the empty resistance slogans. The people of Gaza said, we want a basic, dignified life, and we don't want to be kept under the boot of an Iranian-sponsored proxy that's holding us hostage in the name of fighting off Israel, in the name of being part of this so-called axis of resistance with Hezbollah, with the Houthis, with the Shia militias throughout the region, including in Syria and Iraq. And so Hamas and the Palestinian people in Gaza protested against Hamas, mass demonstrations in 2017, in 2019, and in 2023, 3 months before October 7th. And Hamas realized that it is hitting a wall in terms of its inability to provide for its people. Despite billions of dollars of Qatari suitcases full of money, it wanted to stop the normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. It was terrified that the prospect of Saudi normalization would render the whole resistance agenda irrelevant, because the region was being reshaped to create this new alliance including with Israel and moderate Arab and Muslim nations and Israel, to fight off Iranian aggression throughout the region. And so, unfortunately, our people, as part of Hamas's nefarious and deadly calculus, particularly by the hardliners in the military wing, the Qassam brigades. Hamas has an armed wing, has a political wing, a social wing. These guys took over the entirety of the movement and plundered our people into this disastrous war without any consideration for our safety, giving us mere slogans about how we're supposed to love martyrdom more than Israelis love life, how we're supposed to give these sacrifices, necessary sacrifices, as Sinwar called them in various intercepted reports, so that Israel can be delegitimized. So the more Palestinians were killed by Israel, the more Israel would be delegitimized and therefore forced to stop the war, or so Hamas thought. And unfortunately, Hamas relied on hordes of pro-Palestine. And I put in quotes because they're not really pro-Palestine. There's a lot more to being pro-Palestine than simply anti-Israel. But Hamas relied on pro-Palestine folks in the Western world to place maximum pressure, media and other political pressure, on their respective governments to get Israel to stop this attack. And unfortunately, when that failed for our people, Hamas really, truly realized the extent of the disaster. And even then, instead of stopping it, they kept on and on and on for 15 months. And it was really a miracle that Mr. Trump was able to pull the different threads that were on the table already and bring them together before he even had assumed office to make the ceasefire happen.
But Ahmed, you know about the suffering in Gaza. You've lost relatives and friends in this latest war. Some of us were talking about this tactic in the days after October the 7th. If you understand these issues, it's obvious. Hamas want Palestinians dead because that helps in their propaganda war against Israel. Yet media and academics around the Western world have been puppets for their propaganda.
Precisely that. And unfortunately, and to be clear, and I appreciate when you opened the segment, you said that I absolutely do and at times ferociously criticize Israel's war strategy, and have done so publicly and to Israeli and Jewish media outlets out in the open. But it is indisputable that Hamas viewed spilled Palestinian blood as necessary to show us as victims, to show the bloodied Palestinian bodies, and force the international community to react against Israel, hoping that people would forget the disaster that was Hamas's decision to launch October 7th, the disaster that was Hamas's rise to political power and control of Gazans for the past 18 years, the disaster that was all these wars and billions of dollars of reconstruction aid and tens of thousands of lives. We're approaching the 20-year anniversary of the withdrawal of Israeli settlements. And Gaza sits in ruins. It's been an absolute nothing, for nothing, zero to show for it. And so, unfortunately, I have been on a mission to try to educate folks to say that you can criticize Israel's war strategy, but understand the nefariousness and the evil of Hamas.